Ovaj dirljivi ponovni susret lava i ljudi koji su ga othranili prometnuo se u senzaciju na YouTube-u i u srce dirnuo milijune ljudi.
It was just an incredible reunion. Whether we were human or he was animal was sort of irrelevant.
It has to be the kind of ultimate moment of life with Christian, really.
You've only got to see that embrace. You can't describe it in any other way. It's an embrace of love.
60-ih je godina u Londonu par prijatelja kupio lavića i počeo graditi nevjerojatno prijateljstvo.
He just adored them. It's the way he looked at them. You can see the love in his eyes.
A spona je ostala čvrsta i nakon što su lava pustili da se na slobodi izbori za vlastito mjesto u afričkom čoporu.
We thought he could be killed.
Christianu je najveći suparnik tada postao najbolji prijatelj. Prvi ćemo put čuti cijelu priču o Christianu, laviću iz Herodsa. London, godine 1969. Mladima cijelog svijeta glavno je glazbeno, modno i kulturno središte. King's Road, gradska je špica, privlači umjetnike i putnike koji žele iskusiti užitke londonskog života. Ovdje će se naći i fakultetske kolege John Randall i Ace Berg. Mladi Australci došli su ostaviti svoj pečat.
Well, it was a well-worn path, in fact. It was like a rite of passage.
And Australians headed for London. It was the Mecca. It was where everything was happening. It was the exciting, swinging London.
It was just a marvellous time to be there. We did know a lot of quite well-known people.
The Rolling Stones, you would see them driving up and down the King's Road. This was a fantastic time to be in London.
Došljaci iz Australije nisu samo tulumarili s rock zvijezdama i glumcima. Otputili su se i u posjet Herodsu. Slavna robna kuća u Knightsbridgeu imala je i vlastitu prodavaonicu životinja.
Here, Brazilian tapir, vultures, fruit bats, raccoons. People would say that you could get anything from Harrods, from a pin to an elephant. And we did actually get an elephant for somebody at one time.
Yes. Hand-reared cubs, of course, because these are so very much tamer.
U studenome 1969. Herods je na prodaju dao 2 lavlja mladunca, lavicu Martu i lavića Markusa, kojeg će poslije prekrstiti u Christiana. Lavići su došli iz zoološkog vrta Ilfracombe u Devonu kao 5. naraštaj rođen u zatočeništvu.
It was an absolutely astounding moment to just look and see these two beautiful creatures for sale.
Christian was just full of personality, and he was so irresistible.
And we just kind of looked at each other and said, right, we're going to buy him.
60-ih su godina egzotični kućni ljubimci bili veoma popularni i bilo ih je sasvim zakonito držati. Njihovu je prodaju ograničio zakon o ugroženim vrstama, koji je na snagu stupio tek 1976. U Herodsu su moguće kupce prethodno ispitivali da budu sigurni kako će lavići dobiti ozbiljne vlasnike.
John asked all the right questions, wanted to know what the pitfalls would be, and always felt that they would do the best for Christian anyway.
Ace i John položili su Herodsov ispit i kupili Christiana za 250 gvineja, što bi danas bilo više od 3000 funta. Ni jedan ni drugi nisu imali iskustva s velikim mačkama.
The reaction to us buying Christian was probably universally, you've both gone mad, and it's quite dangerous, and you're stupid, and it'll end in tears.
It did not seem to be such an absurd idea because London in the 60s was swinging. People were doing all kinds of extraordinary things.
Prvi im je problem bio kamo s razigranim novim ljubimcem. Obojica su radila kao prodavači u Sofistiketu, prodavaonici restauriranog borova pokućstva u King's Roadu, i stanovali su u stanu iznad salona. Nagovorili su vlasnike da Christianu kao igralište prepuste prostrani podrum lokala.
He had a huge kitty litter tray which he used religiously like a domestic cat. There was some furniture stored down there that was going to be restored, and so that he could climb on and hide under or creep around and play hide-and-seek.
He was very imaginative. He was very good at making up games. He could stalk around the furniture of Sophisticat and make it look like you were hiding from him. So then he had the freedom to run at you. He loved toys, but he'd shred a teddy bear in 2 seconds flat. He loved waste paper baskets, and you could chew it, shred it, wear it on your head.
Spremačica je dolazila svaki dan, a Lav je i njezin pribor doživljavao kao igračke.
He thought she was there just as a kind of cabaret, because she had dusters and mops and vacuum cleaners and things.
So he would put his paws on the front of the carpet sweeper and we'd play push-pull, and then he'd steal my dusters and stuff like that. It was great fun.
She wasn't frightened of him at all. I mean, not in the slightest.
And of course my children used to go back to school and say, don't mess with us because our mom looks after a lion.
Prodavaonica Christianu nije bila jedino zabavište. Ace i John često su ga vodili u posjet prijateljima.
The girlfriends that we'd left Australia with had a big flat in Queensgate. He knew the flat, so he was just padding around, and he decided to just walk through the flat, walked down and pushed his way into the bathroom where Robbie was in the bath.
And in pads Christian puts his hands up on the side of the bath and starts drinking the bath water. Well, I'm sort of waving and thinking it's better to be friends. Then I thought, well, if he runs out of water, he might get hungry, so I got particularly nervous. Anyway, with a lot of screaming and everything, John eventually came and got him out of the bathroom, but I was pretty scared.
Christian je rastao i afričkog je lava u gradu bilo sve teže hraniti. Za 6 mjeseci već gutao 3 kilograma mesa na dan.
Lions, certainly in the wild, are large animals. An adult male lion can grow to about 250 kilograms. And in order to maintain a body of that size, you do need to eat lots, and you do need to eat fairly regularly. They'll bring down something like a wildebeest, and the pride will feed on that, and they will really stuff themselves. They eat until you see hugely extended stomachs.
U Chelsea gnu nije dolazi u obzir, no priskočili su prijatelji i lavoljupci. Svi su pokušavali namiriti Christiana, koji je jeo sa sve većim tekom.
There was a chef from a nearby restaurant who brought him fabulous meat that we had rather had our eye on, very nice steaks that just hadn't been used that day, and very big bones.
It was an expense to keep him, so we thought, what can we do? So we met a photographer called Derek Catani, who was a friend of a friend, and he came along and started a record of Christian's life in London.
And so I said, well, let's get together a couple of feature ideas. And I said, well, Easter's coming up now. Let's think about something to do with Easter and Easter chicks. It was an amazing situation because we thought that a great big paw was going to come down on this poor little chick, and that was the end of the day old chick. But none of it. He was so gentle.
I think we got £30 for the photograph, which was very good.
And they decided he had to have a bank account, so we took him up to our bank, and our bank manager opened an account for him so he could put his money in.
Odakle platiti Christianovo meso nije bio jedini izazov. Lavu u razvoju treba se mnogo kretati, no Ace i John bili su svjesni kakva bi se strka digla kad bi ga pustili da jurca zelenim čelzijskim parkovima. Na kraju Kings Roada otkrili su zidom opasano groblje crkve Moravske braće, savršeno ograđeni prostor na kojem se Christian može rastrčati. Ace i John uspjeli su nagovoriti velečasnog Williamsona. Dopustio im je da na groblju puštaju Christiana.
My father had a wicked sense of humour, having a lion exercising over graveyards of Christians. On the other hand, he was also a great naturalist, and he would have recognised a real need to let the lion have some freedom rather than being cooped up in a shop or a house.
Ace i John nisu bili svjesni da Christian nije samo zaigran. Razvijao je vještine koje lav treba za opstanak u divljini.
A lot of the play that young cubs will do with one another when they will practice stalking and jumping on one another and play fighting is all part of learning how to hunt. But there is a learnt aspect, and that learnt aspect is often reinforced by play.
Christianovi lavlji nagoni izašli su na vidjelo, no u 4 se mjeseca očito veoma vezao za Acea i Johna.
He was dependent on us, but he loved us back as well. We were the closest things to him.
But Christian had such a personality that he was sort of another person in their lives, wasn't he?
He would always leap in, put his arms around them. They would put their arms around him.
He was affectionate with us. He would jump up on us or sit on us, or he wanted to be close to us, or like a good cat. If you were reading a newspaper on the telephone, he'd want to sit on you.
It was just like having a child, and it was like John and Ace were his parents, you know. He just adored them. It's where he looked at them. You can see the love in his eyes.
S 8 mjeseci Christian imao 70 kilograma. Ace i John shvatili su da je njegov rast sve veći problem.
Christian really was getting too big, and very quickly was really too big to bundle up if we were worried about a situation, just to hold him in our arms, and we were worried what would happen next. As he grew bigger, he was really capable of inflicting real damage.
Once, I think I'd been out for the evening and I called him, you know, like we used to, stand at the top of the stairs and call him, and he ran up the stairs to put his hands on my shoulders like he does, and he slipped on the top step and put his claws out and ripped my whole dress off the front of me. My beaver dress, my best beaver dress. But he didn't hurt me. I mean, I didn't have a claw mark or anything, it's just the whole dress went off.
Nakon sljedećeg ispada, Ace i John itekako su dobro shvatili da je Christian grabežljivac kojemu je nasilje u krvi.
One day he found a fur belt had dropped off some customer's coat in the shop, and he picked it up, and I went to pull it away from him. And for the first time he flattened his ears and snarled in a very, very nasty way, frightening me and both of us. John came then, but signaling very clearly, I'm having this, don't try and take it away from me.
Zbog Christianovog brzog rasta i redovito razgibavanje postalo problem.
Towards the end, as Christian got larger, it was becoming a little difficult because of the visitors in the churchyard. And I think my father felt a little bit uncomfortable the larger the lion got, how long this could continue for, and suggested that it might have to stop.
So we knew that the time was coming where we had to accept that London was no longer going to be his home.
Christian je trebao novi dom, no sve su i mogućnosti bile mrske. Ace i John otpisali su cirkuse i zoološke vrtove. Nisu htjeli da lav živi u zatočeništvu kao njegovi roditelji.
We'd just become so fond of him, you know, we just knew that we couldn't betray him by putting him in a zoo. We just couldn't do that for Christian. We thought we've got to find something. What was it going to be? We didn't know.
Acea i Johna već je hvatao očaj kad je jedan slučajni susret sve promijenio. Filmske zvijezde Bill Travers i Virginia McKenna posjetili su salon pokućstva u Kings Roadu i našli se oči u oči s Christianom. Ace i John iskoristili su priliku.
When they met us, I think they thought, what about, is there a chance here? Because they said to Bill, do you think you could help us to get Christian, you know, a better future? And he said, would you agree to let Christian go back to the wild?
Joy Adamson's well-known story of life with the lions has now been brought to the screen.
Travers i McKennica prije nekoliko su godina glumili u filmskome hitu Živjeti slobodno. Predložak mu je bila istinita priča o lavici Elsie, koja je kao mladunče ostala bez majke, i o njezinu uspješnu povratku u divljinu. Poneseni tim iskustvom, glumci su se i dalje strastveno zauzimali za spas lavova i ostali u doticaju s čovjekom čiji je rad nadahnuo film. George Adamson bio je stručnjak za lavove. Othranjivao je osirotjele laviće poput Else i pripremao ih za život u divljini. Njegov je rad izazvao prijepore. Pojedini su stručnjaci tvrdili da je suživot lavova i ljudi u logoru u divljini nužno opasan. No Ace i John u Adamsonu su vidjeli najbolju priliku za Christianov povratak na slobodu.
So they contacted George Adamson, and he then said, what an exciting challenge to be able to try, he did stress try, and rehabilitate a fifth generation zoo-bred lion. Because Elsa was born in Africa. Elsa knew the smells of Africa. Elsa knew what a waterbuck looked like. Christian didn't.
It was the perfect solution. We were just thrilled. Anything to avoid a safer, longer life in confinement, in cages. So we didn't hesitate for a moment.
No, iskrsnula je velika zapreka. Kenijska je vlada morala odobriti Christianov uvoz u zemlju. Čekali su ih dugi i zakučasti pregovori.
There was a huge amount of red tape and, of course, some reaction in Kenya from why would we want to bring basically another predator into our country? We've got enough lions already.
Christian je rastao sve brže. Hitno je trebao veći životni prostor. Virginia i Bill ponudili su spasonosno rješenje. Christian može boraviti na njihovom mladanjskom imanju u Dorkingu, u Sariju, dok Kenijci ne donesu konačnu odluku.
It was marvelous when we first got there. You know, he jumped out and then just didn't take off, but just him walking without us guiding him, trying to lead him or control him. Scared by the scarecrow in their garden. And again, he didn't run off. He just would go ahead and investigate and then come back to us for reassurance.
Virginia i Bill za Christiana su ogradili golem komad vrta. U životu nije vidio ništa što bi više nalikovalo na divljinu.
Christian, he was obviously delighted when he moved to the country. You know, it was a different environment and he loved his space there.
Ace i John dali su otkaz na poslu i preselili se u kamp kućicu kraj Christianove nastambe. Znali su da su pred njima posljednji tjedni s Christianom i htjeli su što bolje iskoristiti svaki trenutak.
When we were in the country, it never for a moment crossed our minds that we would leave him there without us being with him.
Christian was our responsibility. We didn't want him to feel abandoned. That was part of our deal with him.
It was such a pleasure to have more time with him. And yes, one did grow even closer to him and get to know him even better.
They were always trying to think of ways to keep him interested. That was to stimulate him, you know, so he didn't get fed up and bored. We took him very early one morning to go to West Wittering and run on the beach with balloons. When he dipped his paw in the sea and hated it, you see, oh gosh, I don't like this, he went off. So we were all, I think I remember my husband was rushing along, waving a balloon in the air or something, because we brought all these balloons down to play with. But Christian didn't want to, he just wanted to race. He just raced on the beach. And we all puffed and blew after him, you know, and then we all flopped into the sand.
Prošla su 4 tjedna od Christianova preseljenja u Dorking. Od kenijskih vlasti ni glasa. Odgađanje je značilo da Christianu i novi stan postaje pretjesan.
He occasionally tried to climb the wire, so we did in fact build like an overhang to just ensure he wouldn't get out.
Christian je rastao. Dalje može biti samo sve gore i gore. Legendarni borac za zaštitu životinja George Adamson Christianu je nudio mjesto u svome rezervatu u Keniji. No Ace'a i Johna hvatao je strah. Što ako Kenijci odbiju primiti Christiana?
We did get scared that it could all fall through, so we got quite worried.
Ace'ov i Johnov san o Christianovu povratku u divljinu našao se pod velikim upitnikom. Zamjenski plan nisu imali i Christianova je budućnost bila na kocki. Poslije 3 mjeseca pregovora, kenijska je vlada Christianu napokon odobrila ulazak u zemlju. Mladi lav putuje u Afriku.
We get him out to Heathrow. We gave him a very mild sedative, which was recommended by various vets and the London Zoo.
I remember we stood there and we saw him, and then they put something in the front so that he couldn't see anymore. And then he was lifted on the hoist up into the hold, and it was quite heart-stopping, actually.
That was scary, seeing him loaded into the hold at Heathrow, and we weren't really sure if he'd survive the journey.
Od Londona do Nairobija 1970. putovali su beskrajnih 15 sati. Tek su se tada Bill Travers, Ace i John ponovno sastali s Christianom.
It was just a huge relief to see him at the other end.
Christian se domogao Afrike, no može li preživjeti u divljini? Sve ovisi o jednome čovjeku, Georgeu Adamsonu.
He was smaller than we imagined and quite dapper, in quite a crisp sort of safari suit.
Skromnog su gospodina u Keniji poštovali, unatoč velikim prijeporima. Naime, pitome lavove privikavao na povratak u divljinu, a mnogi su smatrali da time ugrožava ljude. George će Christiana odvesti u rezervat Kora, u pustome dijelu zemlje. Nadao se da ondje oko Christiana može okupiti novi lavlji čopor.
We were driving up, Christian was in the back, and I knew he wanted to go to the loo. So I said, look, Mr. Adamson, please, we've got to stop. And George said, look, we're in the middle of nowhere. If he runs off, he said, we'll never catch him.
We very, very confidently said, no, he won't run off.
Christian got out, went to the loo, and I said, okay, come on, back you get. So he just jumped straight back into the Land Rover.
And in fact, George was very impressed.
George said, well, that's quite remarkable. I think he's going to be fine, and you can call me George. So I turned around to Christian and said, yes, yes, you'll be all right.
Ace, John i Christian prevalili su 200 kilometara i naposljetku stigli u rezervat Kora, Christianov novi dom u divljini.
It must have been extraordinary for Christian to suddenly find himself in such a totally alien environment.
Christian je i na novome kontinentu tražio udobnost doma.
The first night in Africa was a bit embarrassing, really. Ace had a bunk here, and I had a stretcher here and a stretcher there, and Christian was there. Well, of course, he slept on one of the beds with a pillow.
Kreveti, jastuci, Ace, John i fotograf Derek. Christian je zacijelo zaključio da je Afrika puki izlet. Promjena sredine nije ga uzdrmala.
Watching Christian's reaction to crocodiles and hippo popping their heads out of the water. He didn't want to be aggressive towards them. He just thought that they were part of the landscape.
Ace, John i Christian samo su naizgled opušteni. Christian je bio londonski lav i zato mu je Afrika bila veoma opasna.
There are clear challenges in releasing a lion to the wild. It's not simply the matter of opening the back of a lorry door and letting it run free, because if you do that, it would be very likely to encounter other lions, behave inappropriately, and risk death.
George Adamson kanio je stvoriti novi lavlji čopor. Jezgru bi činili Christian i još 2 lava. Osirotjela mlada lavica Katanija i odrasli mužjak Boj, rođen i pripitomljen u Africi. No najprije su se morali zbližiti, što je Christianu bilo posve novo iskustvo.
He thought he was the only lion in the world. And it was a shock to meet one that was 3 times his size.
The first time he saw Boy, you can imagine, he hasn't seen a mature lion since his father. And there's this enormous and very cross lion too.
Boy je u Christianu vidio konkurenciju. Mladi lavovi u čoporima često pokušavaju svrgnuti starije vođe.
His first reaction when he saw Christian was very aggressive and frightening.
He would keep charging at the wire to really scare Christian, and he was scared, and we were scared too, I can tell you. Boy was probably about 400 pounds, comes hurtling at the wire fence, which was only chicken wire. It's quite something.
Christian was scared and got in behind our legs and sort of snarled unhappily. It was quite scary.
Christian se nije mogao do vijeka skrivati iza Johna i Ace'a. Morao je izgladiti račune s Bojem izvan nastambe, da uspostave hijerarhiju, inače ništa od Georgeova čopora.
One day, George said, we just have to bite the bullet. We just have to do it. And George and Ace and John and Christian walked up this rock to where Boy was sitting. Boy rose, and he seemed to double in size, and his mane sort of swelled. He looked truly, truly frightening.
Trenutak života ili smrti. Hoće li Boy prihvatiti Christiana?
It's really terrifying to see this huge, fully grown lion coming down and just belting Christian.
In the quickness of the movements, we thought he could be killed.
Za divno čudo, tu je Christianu proradio lavlji nagon.
Christian snarled but rolled onto his back in the correct submission to an adult lion.
Christian stood it, he didn't run away, and he obviously knew that this was part of being a lion was.
Borba za položaj unutar čopora lavovima je nešto posve prirodno. Boy nije ozlijedio Christiana, ali mu je pokazao gdje mu je mjesto.
Boy had established he was the boss, he was the father of the bride, as it were, and Christian knew his place, and they became absolutely closest of friends.
Georgeu Adamsonu bilo je drago što se prvi čopor u kori napokon počeo oblikovati. No tu više nije bilo mjesta za Ace'a i Johna.
We could see it was starting to work, and we had to step back, and the relationship that we had with Christian, we had to pass on to George. It was sad to leave him, but there was a moment of thinking, there you are, you're in the right place, the right man, and you've really got a chance.
The fact that we'd got him there and he would probably have a future there, it made our feelings not irrelevant, but that was such a good feeling.
Ace'u i Johnu život se vrti oko Christiana više od godinu dana. Poslije 4 tjedna u Keniji kucnuo je čas. Moraju ga ostaviti s novom obitelji, njegovim lavljim čoporom.
He did pad down the track as we left, and that was sad.
John i Ace teška su se srca vratili u London, no George Adamson redovito ih je izvješćivao kako Christian napreduje.
I've still got all his letters that, he would bring us up. He'd type them away on his, little old Remington, whatever it was. It was always, the good news of how he and Boy were getting along. So it really kept us up to date with what was happening.
Najveća je vijest iz Kore, 2 mjeseca nakon njihova odlaska, bila da su Boj i Christian postali nerazdvojni. Neprijatelji su se sprijateljili i kad se danima ne bi vraćali u nastambu. Afrički je lav mladog europskog lava učio o životu u divljini. No Kora nije bila samo njihov dom. U rezervatu su imali lavlje suparnike i život im je bio prepun opasnosti.
Boy and Christian being males were always going to have trouble with the wild lions. They were never going to just let them carve their own territory out in their territory.
U 8 mjeseci nakon Aceova i Johnova odlaska, Christianov je čopor nastojao uspostaviti svoj teritorij. No, tad je pretrpio težak udarac. U žestoku okršaju sa suparničkim čoporom, Boj je teško ozlijeđen. Unatoč Georgeovoj skrbi, Bojeva je trauma imala dalekosežne posljedice. Narav mu se promijenila i postao je doista opasan za ljude. 6. lipnja 1971. Boj se vratio u logor u kojem su stanovali George i ekipa, a u njoj i Georgeov pomoćnik Stanley. Nadomak logora, Boj je napao Stanleya.
The first thing that was heard was this shrieking and roaring and shrieking from a person and roaring from an animal. George grabbed his gun and saw Stanley in Boy's mouth. And George had no alternative but to shoot Boy. And Stanley actually died too from his wounds. He never recovered. So it was a double and terrible tragedy.
It was just devastating news. It became international news about George Adamson's tame lions, the danger of his work rather than the good aspects of his work.
Stanleyjeva smrt bila je tragedija i gubitak i za njegovu obitelj i za Georgea. Christianu je Bojeva smrt značila gubitak najboljeg prijatelja. Satima je sjedio na Bojevu grobu. Ostao je jedini mužjak u čoporu i morao se snalaziti sam. Tony Fitzjohn s 25 je godina bio veliki ljubitelj divljih životinja i priključio se Georgeu Adamsonu u Kori. Prepoznao je Christianovu tugu.
He did miss Boy. It did add to his fear level. Boy wasn't there anymore. It was sort of, how do I cope now? What do I do? You know, why is he gone? Where's he gone? And there's always that period of worry and uncertainty, non-understanding of why someone suddenly disappeared. But they get themselves together pretty quickly and have to, you know, sort of create their own lives.
Ace i John zabrinuli su se zbog Bojeve smrti i Christianove usamljenosti. Godinu dana nakon što su se rastali, odlučili su da je vrijeme za povratak u Afriku. Bili su Christianova obitelj i željeli su mu pružiti oslonac, no znali su da se u međuvremenu štošta promijenilo.
We weren't sure of our reception this time. We always thought anything could happen. It was very dangerous. It was the wilds of Africa.
Ace i John u strepnji su proveli prvi dan u logoru. Zatim su se uputili na Christianov teritorij. George je ovamo dobrodošao, no Ace i John tako reći su tuđinci. Christiana nisu vidjeli godinu dana. Ako ih doživi kao nezvane goste, moglo bi biti problema.
George appeared on the top of the hill, I suppose about 100 meters away from us, with Christian. Christian ambled down another 10 or 15 meters and had a very long, hard look at us.
You could just see him assessing what was going on. He kept walking slowly down towards us.
And I think that was the point where we actually couldn't bear it any longer and actually called out his name.
And at that moment, the pace picks up. Just so excited. And of course we were. I mean, imagine how excited we were.
It was just an incredible reunion. Whether we were human or he was animal was sort of irrelevant.
Christian je prigrlio Ace'a i Johna, pa su njegov primjer slijedile i lavice koje su u koru stigle prije 3 mjeseca da se čopor brže razvije. I one su pozdravile došljake.
Suddenly, we were aware that those 2 lionesses were with us as well, and they were greeting us and pushing and shoving.
We had these lions we didn't know milling around us, Christian jumping up on us, George beaming. It was really quite sort of euphoric. It's actually quite hard to find the words for it. Everyone, lions, humans, all felt we'd shared something very, very special. So it was very emotional for all of us, and we knew we'd been part of or witnessed something quite extraordinary.
Christianova se londonska obitelj opustila u društvu afričkih lavica i mladunca koji je ostao bez majke. Ace i John sad su čvrsto vjerovali da je Christian u Africi našao svoje mjesto.
To leave him the second time was easier, really, because you knew he was such a success. He had a wonderful relationship with George. He obviously had a powerful relationship with the lionesses. And he was huge.
Ace i John vratili su se u London bez straha za Christianovu budućnost u afričkoj divljini. No, dok lav raste i sazrijeva, za ljude oko sebe može biti veoma opasan.
George told us later, adolescence was the most dangerous time for lions. That's when he was most wary of them. Christian, at around this time, had in fact knocked Tony to the ground.
He flattened me, put my head in his mouth, rolled over on his back and proceeded to kick me with his back legs. And then he thought that was a lot of fun, so then he shook me a bit and then he dropped me. And I was getting quite scared. He was this huge, great guy just playing with me like a rag doll. And so he came straight for me, so I punched him straight in the nose. And it worked, and he veered off. It must have been like a tap to him, you know, because they're so tough. Christian came up a few minutes later, like, you know, saying hello and being friendly, and, you know, and I refused to talk to him for the rest of the day. He never did it again, but every now and then I get the look. And I'm saying, you do that again, you said. And he goes, oh, not me, you know, and it was great.
Ace i John željeli su da Christian odraste u Africi, da nađe svoje mjesto u divljini. Njegov su život nastavili pratiti s drugoga kraja svijeta.
George had been keeping us up to date with what was happening, and that he'd been disappearing for months on end, and was obviously looking to establish his own territory further away from Cora.
About a year later, we thought it would be nice to go again, just to see how he was getting on.
U lipnju 1972. John i Ace ponovno su prevalili 5000 km i vratili se u Keniju, u želji da se opet sastanu sa svojim 3-godišnjim lavom.
George warned us that he mightn't even come to camp. We still thought it was worthwhile going, just in case we did see him.
Nakon 3 dana čekanja, Christian se napokon vratio u logor.
Of course, he did turn up again. And this time, he was very different from the year before. He had matured considerably. He was much, much bigger. He was much more, I'm grown up now.
He was so incredibly handsome, incredibly lovely. All lions loved him, all humans loved him. He was extraordinary. He lost none of his charisma.
He'd be sitting with us and then suddenly he'd get up and he'd just walk away and sit somewhere else.
We were undoubtedly more superfluous to his life.
It was like, now I've got lion things to do.
Christian se prometnuo u ponosnog odraslog lava, ali nije zaboravio londonske vragolije.
The very last night we had with Christian really was enormous fun.
Everyone was so relaxed and laughing and he was just happy to be around him.
We were all smoking cigarettes in those days and drinking. So, of course, we all were up all night laughing and joking and Christian being silly.
Sitting on us, on the table, totally disrupting us.
And the next day he goes back up to the lionesses. Christian, of course, being up all night was kind of obviously, he had a night out with the boys. Kind of just turned around and went, oh, wallop, and just collapsed, just that's it, girls, I've had it. We went up to see him that night, and he'd gone.
You think you will be back, you will hear news, it'll be a continuing story. And in fact, it was the last time.
He'd gone. He wasn't going to come back.
John i Ace nikad više nisu vidjeli Christiana.
He was no longer dependent on any of us. And that was the most wonderful success. He'd done it.
We just hoped that he'd found his own territory, had his own cubs, had his own pride, and had a marvelous, normal, natural life.
Christian, lavić iz Herodsa, dobio je priliku da živi kao afrički lav. U divljini je mogao poživjeti još 10 godina. John i Ace uvjereni su da su ispravno postupili kad su ga pustili na slobodu. Nedavno su dopunili svoju knjigu Priča o lavu Christianu, u kojoj su ispripovjedali ovu poticajnu priču. No, priča se pretvorila u svjetski fenomen kad je 2006. studentica iz Kalifornije na internetu objavila snimku njihova sastanka s Christianom.
Hi! Hello! I'm John. I just really believe that video needed to be seen. I was surprised it wasn't anywhere else on YouTube or on the internet anywhere else. I couldn't find anything.
Snimka sastanka do danas je zabilježila gotovo 50 milijuna posjeta.
Why do you think it has been so popular on YouTube?
Well, I think it's striking people on a very powerful basis of love. I'm really glad that the internet's out there and is raising awareness, and I'm glad to have been a part of it.
It's like a gift to the world, really. That's how we see it.
Special hug. Thank you.
Special hug.
It is quite mind-boggling. 50 million people have watched the reunion video. And we do wonder, how can we harness that incredible goodwill and interest? So I do think it's all meant to be. I think possibly it's a cry for Africa from Christian from 40 years ago.
If he can raise awareness of conservation and the need to protect endangered species, what a fantastic legacy he's left. Thank you, Christian.